Hello and welcome to another watercolour exercise, this time down at Shortlands Bluff at Queenscliff. I'll get to my palette first up as what we're going to be using. Ultramarine, Cobalt, Cerulean Blue, Indigo Blue, Phthalo, Violet, Neutral Tint, Manganese Blue, Raw Sienna, Burnt Sienna, Magenta, Raw Umber, Sepia, Yellow Cad, Naples Yellow, Indian Yellow, Azo Orange, the reds, Alizarin, Permanent Rose, and finally Cobalt Teal for turquoise. We start with the sky area, wet it down quite thoroughly. Probably only take one wash over this, maybe we might add to it as we go. I want this to be a fairly bright sunlit sort of a day, so manganese blue is my choice here, and we'll cut around the headland and the sandstone areas and so on, and bring this into the area which we've just wet down quite extensively, using a mop to translate plenty of paint and water from the palette to the paper. We'll just add a little bit more just to beef things up a little bit. I want this to dry fairly flat with a little bit of cloud area down to the lower part of the sky. We will remove a bit of that cloud, a bit of the sky area for cloud effect and so on. Same blue for the area of water here as the sky. Just thin down a trifle. Just a smidgen of cobalt added to it here, and allowed that to blend into the damp wash that we already have. A little bit of raw sienna for our base sand colour. Bit of white paper. Leave a bit of this through the foreground of the painting, and also where the water is lapping up on the beach. The underpainting for the bluff area, all of which is sandstone, is a lovely golden yellowy colour, and so we've got some raw sienna with a little bit of orange added to it, just a tiny touch, and we'll cut that in here. We're going to get a little bit of bleed from the sky area into this area of the sandstone, and I'll take that off with a tissue a bit later on, as I do want that to be a little bit lighter as it meets the sun, and you'll see the effect in later frames. We've taken a bit of the sky out at this stage, and I'm just going back over it with a clean brush, a little bit of water, just go back over it and damp out with the tissue a little bit more, just to bring up a bit more of the white paper as near as I can. A little bit of shade underneath it, and we'll just touch it up with a little bit of raw sienna just to warm it up a little bit down the bottom here and under the underside of the clouds. A little bit of a darkish colour of any sort. It can be a blue grey or a green grey. It doesn't make a lot of difference. It wants to be reasonably prominent, and we've got a little bit of raw sienna and a bit of water on our brush just to soften the under edge of that landmass from the opposite side of the bay. A little bit of raw sienna here and there, again just to give us a bit of the effect of a bit of headland on the other side. We have a bit of grey green as under shrubbery colour on the right hand side, and we've allowed that to dry. Now we're just coming back over it with a stronger mix of ultramarine and raw sienna for a nice grey green, a little more paint and a little less water here. And it's a fairly well covered area of shrubbery, as you can see in the photograph, and we're only doing part of this, of course, but we still want to have Plenty of variation in the shrubbery. This is the underpainting for the shadows that you're going to come down the face of the stonework, and we're using just plain burnt sienna here. Fairly wet wash, as we want to make we're going to make this into some fairly dark shade by adding some ultramarine blue into this wash, so we want it to be wet so that the paint will blend very well on the paper. Just a few marks for things on the beach, a little bit of shadow and so on. Just suggestions made with your brush. We'll add some ultramarine blue into the wash, these washes now, and it looks quite strikingly strong at this point, but it will blend to a lovely grey, a lovely shaded area. And we'll probably have to reinforce it a little further a bit later on. It looks very dark now, but it will dry back, and so we'll reinforce that as we go along. Just a little bit of ultramarine into some of these areas just to suggest a bit of shadow. We've abbreviated this view down to the most prominent part of the bluff, probably because it's the most striking part of the scene. We're not going to include the black lighthouse in this, and we've got a closer focus to the area that we've chosen. Foliage here is quite thick, and all we really see is the difference between light and shade just by suggested shapes. There's no format to it, just a mixture of various greens which you can make on your palette using your darker blues and either Indian yellow, raw sienna, any of these, and I suggest that you experiment with those to make up your mind as to whether, if you want a darker green, use stronger blues. If you want a lighter green, use lighter blues, and any yellow, any sienna colour will give you a foliage colour as a result, and I suggest that you experiment with those on your palette to find out what you can produce. Here we've just got a stronger mix of indigo, a bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of neutral tint in the wash, just making these shaded areas a little stronger. Horizontal lines in the limestone. Again, I'm just drawing little bits and pieces here and there, a small round brush. And as they dry back, as the foliage dries back, I can reinforce it with a bit of application of some darker greens, darker greys into these areas and so on. It's meant to be quite rough and scrubby. Again, just suggestions of things on the beach, a bit of seaweed, a little bit of grass and so on, and just touching up some of the darker areas. little bit of shade in the foreground here. There's a pier which comes out here where the viewer would be standing to get this view, and we'll just use a shadow from that being cast out onto the sand, a little bit underneath the cliff itself. You'll notice that there's not a lot of brushwork going on here. I'm putting the paint on the paper rather than brushing it in. Just with the tip of the brush and just a few dots and dashes here and there, and allow the paint to come off the brush into the area that you want rather than force it on with brush marks. This is where watercolor flows from your brush. A couple of people walking a dog along the beach, which is pretty popular down that way. A couple of figures here and a dog, and I'll just give you a bit of an idea as to how they're made up. Done with just some dark paint for start off, and with the same round brush. Not a lot of water in the wash. You can see that the figures are quite dry. The brush marks are quite dry. One colour, just a dark colour for the shape and so on, and then introduce a little bit of something for a flesh colour, a bit of a tan on the legs and so on. We'll give them a bit of colour so that they can be seen. This fellow's got white shorts on, and I'll give his mate a different colour, and I think we'll give him a nice turquoise shirt and so on. A little bit of white feature on the shoulders and head and so on, just a bit of light bounce. You can understand that these figures are only very small in the actual painting and so on. But this is the way that I would put figures into these paintings and so on. They are purely suggestion. Where you position them is fairly important. We'll just reinforce a little bit of this cast shadow here, and we're very close to being completed. That's our study. Thank you for watching, and I hope you get some enjoyment from this one.